event. Duarte Nursery has just gotten in our grasp a couple years ago a whole array of new almond varieties out of Australia, Spain, and some coming out of the breeding programs here in the US. A UC variety and a new USDA variety, the Orizani. We've got some trees and nuts back there if you want to try the Orizani. And so we're really excited to be kind of on finally the back part of the recent round of regional variety trials. And these trials are great because they're diverse in terms of location, they're diverse in terms of orchard design, and they're diverse in terms of rootstocks. And so we can really get a good look at these regional variety trials. Butte, Stanislaus, Madera, Kunsk 86, Nimegard, Hansen, different spacings. Really pleased to see that come in. They're all replicated, randomized. So what we've got is really good quality data. But even though it's really good quality data, it over a large swath of varieties, it doesn't tell us everything. Because I can tell you, in every one of these regional variety trials, our variety, the Bennett Hickman, is doing great. It's a top performer. It's not showing any symptoms. It's not showing any of the leafing failure issues. And so here's a list of some of the top performers in these regional variety trials. You can see the Y1179103, that's a USDA variety. Up at the top there, I know this is tiny print. I call it Yo Bro. It's a brother of Orizani. It's going to get a real name soon. It's set up to be released, but it's a top performer. It's a really high producer across all three trials. This is a ranking of each variety in the regional variety trials by how they've performed from 2000 and third through 8 leaf, 2018 through 2019, or through 2021 actually. And you can see the Y1179103. That's a really high quality nut. A UC 1820, that's a Monterey type nut that may be a good 50-50 planting with Monterey. We're wondering if you want to plant a South Valley late harvest combination, is the 1820 going to be something you can plant 50-50 with Monterey and just do a single harvest type setup there? The Bennett Hickman, again, it's doing really well as a top performer. It's kind of in the non-Perel quality nut, both kernel and in-shell. So growers that want to hit that high premium in-shell market, the Bennett Hickman is really attractive. The non-Perel, you can see where it falls in there, and then the Orizani's down a couple rungs. I think the Orizani is a small tree. It's a lot like an independent sized tree, and we can optimize that, and we'll talk about it. So this is an important slide here. Again, totally unreadable from your point of view, but let's see, does the point, so it's totally unreadable. But what it is, this is from the Crackout event that the Almond Board had, a great event about 4 years ago at the Doubletree where, about 200 industry professionals and 70 different varieties of almonds came in and did a blind tasting evaluation of all the nuts, both international and domestic. And what you can see on this chart is the blue circles up at the very front. That's Orizani. That's the nut we have back at the booth. It's a self-fertile, highly productive variety. Did really well right next to Orizani in that first big oval to the left there is Bennett Hickman. And those are the best, highest quality, total subjective market, hedonic sum they called it. So you can have a hedonic sum for nuts now. And then as we go down there, you see a couple circles around a couple of the Australian varieties that are in gold. That's Mira and Carina. Those are two Australian varieties that I'll show you a picture of in a minute. They're very hard shell Spanish looking varieties out of Australia. And those are available from Duarte Nursery. Now we'll have that license done here within the next week. Here again is the cumulative yields on some of these. So the top performers, this is the 1820. This is the Monterey look-alike, we think. So again, if you want just a flat out yield, high yield, Monterey compatible, 50-50 planting with Monterey, this is one to look at, kind of a special purpose nut. This is the one I call Orizani's brother, or Yo Bro, because nobody's going to remember the number. But it's a very high quality, high yield nut. It doesn't look like it's going to be a great in-shell variety because the shell's a little harder than non-Perel or Orizani, but it's an excellent kernel quality. Another thing I like about this nut, we've discussed a lot, is it's a fairly vigorous tree. So we think we can grow it maybe with a little bit less irrigation, maybe a little less nitrogen inputs on a high vigor rootstock. and it comes out 3 days late on the bloom and 7 days before non-pearl of the harvest. So if you're trying to go organic, if you want to avoid navel orangeworm pressure, if you want to minimize water use, we think that a nut that has a very short growing season, especially if it's more of an early short growing season, is going to be a very water efficient nut. And that's going to be one of the themes here on these new varieties. How do we select out the varieties that are going to be, for the wide area guys under Sigma, how are we going to select out varieties that might take a little bit less water in when water is our primary constraint now in terms of nut production? Here's the Orizani. Again, this is a favorite of ours. We call it the gold nut. It's kind of a trademark Duarte Nursery's put on it. It is not proprietary to any nursery in any way. It's public domain. This was released by the USDA. There is no royalty on it. It's free. We've got it from FPS, so we've got high security plant material available. It'll be widely available this fall for large plantings, and we've got trees we could give you today, and we've got trees we could deliver 1,000, 2,000 of from you on many different rootstocks anytime you guys are ready to plant them. If you're planting a self-fertile planting of some of the more popular self-fertiles, getting a couple of Orizanis from us as soon as possible and get your own eyes on them is really an opportunity, and we'd love to work with you on that if it's possible. This is the Bennett Hickman. Really filled a lane going 50-50 with non-pearl for an ultra premium nut. We've seen some leafing failure problems with it in the last couple of years. We're trying to tell growers this is what we're seeing. We don't fully understand it. We do know there's a vegetative off type, a bull tree, that we're getting out of the program. And we've also, you can see the leafing failure here. We've seen it in other varieties, but the incidence and the numbers on Bennett are higher. So we've developed 5 single plant lines off what I'd say are completely normal trees out of my own home planting, completely disease tested. We'll be watching these in the next 5-10 years and just seeing if we can get the Bennett Hickman to calm down by virtue of careful selection. But it is, I'd say the highest revenue blocks in California today are Bennett Hickman non-pearl blocks. When you look at overall production, the premiums being paid for non-pearl level in-shell, there's a lot of reasons to struggle to keep the variety, but there's also a lot to be aware of. Disease testing, and we are actually seeing in the single plant line planting, we put 1 row in of symptomatic trees where we derive the budwood from symptomatic trees, and they're actually showing a little bit of leafing failure at very early stages. So again, we think this might be solvable through line selection. We've all heard that before, so we're just watching it really closely. This is Aldrich, came out in top performers, you know all about that. Booth is a new variety, a proprietary variety licensed through Birchall Nursery, available from a lot of nurseries. It's a conventional variety. Growers are just looking and struggling to find out what to plant with their non-pearl and conventional varieties. Booth looks like a valid option. It's not the most productive, it's not the highest yielding, but it does have a lane in being a pretty decent pollinizer, kind of alongside Aldrich if you want to know what to plant in a non-pearl, 50%, 25% one pollinizer, 25% another. We're seeing the non-pearl Booth Aldrich choice being made. Kester is a new UC variety. It looked like it did really well in the Salida trial, but that was only where it was on Hansen. If you change the rootstock under the variety, you can really change the performance of the variety. The UC proved that by putting a Hansen replicate of Kester in the Salida trial next to Nimegard. And Booth outperformed all the varieties on Nimegard simply because it was on Kester. Outperformed all the varieties on Nimegard simply because it was on a peach almond hybrid, and it was a fairly hard water situation with a tough site. And so we talk a lot about scions. You really are making as important of a decision when you select your rootstock as when you select your scions. Your rootstock can have as much or more economic impact on your planting as your scion choices. So there are new variety trials coming in this next year. We're looking forward to them. There's a whole array of varieties, including these Australian and Spanish varieties that we'll be reviewing here shortly. So here's kind of a table we put together at the nursery. And so on the far right there, you see Spanish Urta varieties, the Vario, the Constanti, and the Marinata. Those are all licensed from Urta by P2G, Progressive Genetics Group. That includes Fowler Nursery, Duarte Nursery, Sierra Gold Nursery, and Birchall Nursery. And those are available from any of us nurseries. They're on their trademark. They're already expired patents back in Spain. So we've just got trademarks on them. We're trying to support the program, so Spanish keep wanting to send us more genetics, and they've got a bunch at FPS now that'll be released in the next generation. In Australia, we've got the whole array of variety: Mira, Capella, Carina, Maxima, Ria, Vela. And then the Bologna, Soletta, and Penta, we have access. We have them at the nursery. We haven't worked out licensing on them yet. But there is some interest, some observations of Soletta in Spain that's getting some interest. These are pictures of them. And here's the Carina, which is probably, I was over in Australia just in late February, touring all these varieties in the fields. This is Carina. One thing you'll notice with the Australian varieties is they look like Spanish varieties. They've got the same really hard shell as the Spanish varieties, a little bit more of the rounder nut shape. And as handlers and processors and hullers and shellers, you're gonna need to probably set up for them with harder rollers and get your head around the processing of them. But Carina is a very high production Australian variety that we think has a lot of promise, particularly in the organic lane. Here's Capella, that just looks absolutely like a Spanish variety. Then here's the Mira, again, that really, really hard shell. It says semi-hard, don't believe semi-hard. That's not a Butte Padre. That's what they call semi-hard in Spain and Australia, is what we just call hard. The Mira, a lot of these Australian varieties are bred with what's called a butterfly hull, like the Orizani, where the hull literally peels back off the nut while it's on the tree. And when you shake the tree, you have 90% plus separation of the hulls from the nut going into the catch system. So this has a lot of implications for catch frame harvesting, for off-ground harvesting, for spinning the hulls out through a cyclone in the field and leaving the hulls in the field to mulch back in. Our calculations at old fertilizer prices a year ago were that the hulls were worth about $100 to $200 an acre in phosphorus, boron, and potassium. At today's prices, they're probably worth $200 plus an acre in phosphorus, potassium, and boron, if we can leave the hulls in the field. And these butterfly hull varieties, the Orizani and what's coming out of Australia particularly, are promising for that. And then you can theoretically dry them that much easier if the hulls are off and the shell and the nut are exposed more. So we think this is a really production system to look, type nut to look at here. Duarte has requested a license to the University of Adelaide. We're undertaking evaluations. We're going to be planting these in an irrigation stress trial at our own nursery. We're going to be planting them in an observational planting with Orizani in an area that's going to be more easily accessible in Modesto Irrigation District. And we're going to be putting them in a very low input trial. All of these hard shells and Spanish and Australian varieties, as well as a couple canaries in the coal mine, are going to go into a planting site that we have where we're just not going to spray them. We're going to do an ultra low input program and see how these varieties withstand disease and pest pressure with very low inputs. Again, as Sigma comes on, we're going to have to learn different growing models, somewhat more like the Spanish model of how many nuts can we produce with very limited water resources, and how can we run a very low input program to produce nuts as water becomes a bigger and bigger constraint. So here's some of the Urcha varieties. If Carina is my favorite Australian variety, Viro is my favorite of the Spanish varieties right now. It's a vigorous tree, it's high production, it's a hard shell, and it has a very late bloom. As we look at nut varieties, some guys are talking about Idaho or Kingman, Arizona for almond growing. Some of these higher frost risk areas, we think the Viro has a lot of promise, and it still is a fairly early harvest, not that long after Nimegard. Comes off the tree well, low doubles, high vigor tree. That has a lot of implications. We're also playing with high vigor rootstocks. And I'm looking at the orchard of the future being somewhere in the 20-foot row spacing by 10-foot tree spacing to 21-foot row spacing by 12-foot tree spacing. The long-term spacing trials we've done at Duarte Nursery on our own property with Roger Duncan over the last 22 years have shown excellent tree survival if we get down to 10 to 12 feet. When you get to 14 feet, you start losing trees at about 15, 16 years. So the best way to replant an orchard sustainably is not to have to replant the orchard. So if we go higher density and shrink those trees down, now we're not growing large breed dogs that die soon. We're growing trees that stay compacted in their lane, and the orchard lasts longer. Morinata, that's a very low variety, suitable for some of the most high density orchards. Constanti, this one's, I think, is a throwaway. It's getting popular in Australia and in Spain, but we're not seeing a lot of interest in it going forward. So we are licensed on the Urcha varieties, and we can ship trees out now. We're not looking for anyone to go plant 100 acres of this. We're asking, any growers that want to have a block of, 100 each, a row each, 10 trees each, 5 trees each, near their holer, where lots of people can see them, near their office where they can walk out and look at them. Any place where you want to get familiar with these varieties in the short term, we'd love to get you trial sets out there so we can start getting our head around it. More old varieties of Spanish stuff we've got. Really, as we look at almond selections going forward, just to wrap up, tier 1 I call, that's your non-pearl Bennett lane, might be a Yorizani lane. That's where you've got good water security, you've got expensive land, and you want to do the highest revenue orchard possible. And I really think the non-pearl Yorizani and Bennett Hickman are going to occupy this lane, because this is where we really need to optimize revenue to justify what we're paying for the really high quality irrigation district land these days. Tier 2 is more of the large institutionals. They just want maximum yield, simplicity of growing, and that's where you see the Independence, the Shasta, maybe the Yorizani, and maybe some of these other self-fertiles coming in, where you're just looking for a very simplified, expandable operation. You don't want to make 2 different harvest passes. You just want to get through there and run as simply as possible, because you have a very large scale management scheme. Tier 3, this is where you're just looking for the highest yields possible. If you're down in Wasco, Kern County, you like the Fritz, the Monterey, you're not afraid of late harvest. We think that some of the Monterey, the Fritz, you got Buttes and Padres are kind of falling out as some of these other varieties come in. But maybe the 1840 or there's another variety we're playing with a local grower that looks like another Monterey compatible, single harvest Monterey compatible variety called Avamag, not Avamag. Anyways, it's one from Phil Yori, PY1. It is going to be hopefully in the next generation of trials, and we're cleaning it up a virus right now, but there's still a lane for just maximum production in a warm climate with high inputs. And then tier 4, this is where I think the industry is going to have to put the most attention right now. What almond varieties and rootstocks can we plant? What is the orchard design going to be that gives you crop per drop? Absolute maximum crop per drop. And if that crop per drop is not going to be an incredibly high amount of production per acre, then we need to do like the Spanish do and minimize inputs. And that's where a late bloom, dodging some bloom sprays, a high vigor variety that doesn't need as much nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium input, and super high vigor rootstocks like Bright's Hybrid 5 or FXA is another one that came out of USDA that we like a lot. Can we just optimize production and minimize crop inputs? I'm going to stop there just because I want to answer any questions that are out there.